이제 게임을 시작합니다.
똑똑 누구십니까? 꼬마입니다. 들어오세요. 꼬마야 꼬마야 뒤로 돌아라. 꼬마야 꼬마야 땅을 짚어라. 꼬마야 꼬마야 날 들어라. 꼬마야 잘 먹어라.
제발 애기랑 준이는 좀 살려주세요. 이 늙은이가 이렇게 빌게요. 제발 애기랑 엄마만 좀 내보내주세요.
누구십니까? 꼬마입니다. 들어오세요.
Hello Mudbeards, Squid Game fans, and anyone else who thinks the idea of recreating the Squid Games in real life is just not a good one. And today, I wanted to talk about Season 3 of Squid Games, and more specifically, morality's place within it. And by the end of the video, I'll reveal the one other series that I truly believe accomplishes what I think Squid Games is trying to accomplish. With that being said, let's go ahead and talk about morality and its place within the Squid Game series. Just a fair warning, my pronunciation of some of these characters' names will probably be incorrect, so please don't blast me down in the comments. Throughout the 3 seasons we see of the show, there's a lot of contestants with different backgrounds and circumstances that lead them to join the games. Some, it's purely greed, they want the cash. Some find themselves in a desperate situation and need the cash by any means necessary. And some, like player 456, know of the games or are secretly a part of the games. And we can see different examples of morality presented in all these characters, and with some characters we can see the evolution of their own humanity and morality. Let's go ahead and start off with the character of Guhan, a man who struggled to retain a solid relationship with his daughter, and finding himself constantly in debt and looking for ways to earn money. Guhan was the central protagonist of the series and the character we follow through all 3 seasons. Guhan by no means started out as an action hero and has every reason to become the villain of the story. What matters the most is his final action was a noble one. See, Guhan had reached a point where he survived the Squid Games and had to endure with survivor's guilt, for a while not even touching the money he's earned. However, we see in his final discussion with player 100 where they have a bet on who will help the drunk man outside the building, Guhan's faith in humanity gets reinvigorated when a pedestrian actually decides to help them out. And just before he took his winnings and opportunity to go to the US and reunite with his daughter, he instead chooses to go and stop the Squid Games once and for all, or at least save as many lives as he can. In my personal opinion, part of this could be to make up for his absence around his daughter for so many years. Perhaps Guhan feeling if he could save people from the Squid Games or stop them altogether, he'd finally earn his place by his daughter's side, having spent so many years feeling like a failure around her. But even though his intentions were pure, we see several times throughout the series that Guhan's morality does waver. One of the first times we really see this is during the marble game of Season 1, when he decides to take advantage of player 100's fake dementia. Obviously this doesn't sit with him very well, and it turns out he wasn't responsible for the death of player 100, but we do see there is another instance where Guhan leans towards his darker side. When Daiho, or player 3A8, fails to help assist during the rebellion, it results in the action failing and Guhan losing almost everybody he got involved in the attack. And as soon as Guhan hears that Daiho is essentially responsible for their failed attempt, he turns all his built anger, resentment, and rage and aims it at Daiho. Which, to be fair, he does deserve somewhat, but in the long scheme of things, Daiho is just another victim of the Squid Games like everybody else. And a victim who, while maybe being a bit of a coward, really did care for the people around him and the small team he made in the few days he was there. Even in small moments like the Mingle game where Daiho was one of the first people to grab Guhan and take him to safety. It was obvious Daiho was facing guilt with his actions and wasn't able to fully take accountability for what he did and his involvement in the attempt's failure. However, the idea that Guhan would be in the moral right for taking down Daiho in this situation is an incorrect one. Guhan himself even realizes this after the fact, when he finally admits that it's his own fault. In reality, it's not his own fault, and there's a lot of other players and circumstances at play, but this is just to help represent where his mental state is at and his moral standpoint. Seeing him in the lowest place he could possibly be, his final effort to really make something matter in these games is to protect player 222 and player 222's baby. And with this final resolve and newbound mission, he does accomplish just that. Maybe not in the way he would like, but in the way that matters. And that's more than we could say for Dora the Explorer, who literally did nothing the entire season. But he wasn't the only one with upstanding morals. There are some characters whose morals never really broke. Characters like Hyunju, who fought to protect until the very end, or characters like Gomja, who sacrificed everything for what was morally right and protecting the innocent. But let's go ahead and cut to another character whose morality is displayed throughout the story in a very intriguing way. This would be of the character of Kang Nuall, or one of the Squid Game's guards. We see in the beginning of the story, alongside others, that she seems to be being approached by the Squid Game's leaders to become another contestant, though it's revealed early on in Season 2 that she's actually being signed on to become a guard. Throughout her time in the position, we see that she's mostly just there to get the job done and isn't necessarily all for the organ harvesting that's going on behind the scenes. This builds conflict between her and the fellow guards, who are getting tired with her killing the contestants completely and not leaving them alive a little bit so the organs are better when they're harvested. This is our first clue that while she is morally bendable, she does have her own principles and beliefs. This later elevates when she happens to see one of the contestants is a man she knew outside of the Squid Games. This same man having a daughter with a severe illness. Having been a defector of North Korea and someone who misses her own child, she immediately grew an attachment to the little girl and to her father. And she spends almost the entirety of Season 3 doing everything she can to get that father back to his little girl. See, while she knew the system was broken and was almost ready to tolerate some of the more severe injustices that were taking place behind the scenes, it's obvious when push comes to shove, when placed in a certain position, she'll do what she truly believes is right, even if the whole world is seemingly against her. And against all the odds and likelihood that he should ever make it out, he did happen to go off and live a better life with his daughter. And even more surprising is the fact that she herself happened to have quite a happy ending as well. And in a show full of characters who get very unjust endings to their story, this was definitely a silver lining in the series. But let's go ahead and get into the morality of the people who kind of keep the Squid Games going. And that is, of course, the rich folk we see in every season. Those who don the masks, who were a part of the games for a little bit, and who are bidding on the humans like their horses. If you're like me, you found most scenes with them a little bit obnoxious. About as obnoxious as the dub translation for watching a lot of shows that aren't primarily English. But I believe in this series there is a specific purpose for this. See, at first we see examples of their lack of empathy or care for others when they're looking at the contestants and wondering why more of them are screwing each other over. But there's no better example of their soullessness than when it comes to the baby of player 222. This baby had nothing to do with the games and was voted on by these same observers to be put into the games. Even the contestants that are in the games that are at some point even willing to hurt the baby are at no point blind to the fact that there is something wrong with doing this. Some of them justifying it with excuses like it's easier for the baby to end it this way, but most of them lead their arguments with sympathy, claiming they understand or they even have their own kids at home. But when it comes to the rich observers, they can't seem to understand why anyone doesn't treat this baby the same way as any other contestant, if not just an easier contestant to take down. This escalates to the point where in the finale, we even see player 456 with the baby as the last two standing, with one of them needing to fall for the other to take home the victory. However, even after witnessing player 456 do everything he could to make sure this baby was okay and made it to the end, they still fully anticipated him to take the easy win. This lack of morality can almost come off as cartoonish, but I believe there was an objective to writing these rich observers this way because in the following scene, we do get a very powerful performance where 456 gives his final goodbyes. And when it cuts to the rich observers' reactions, I fully expected another bit of cringy dialogue from them. but instead we got utter silence. This moment of silence helped personify these individuals in general, with this one moment of human action putting them in what seems to be disbelief. These beings whose wealth and fortune left them so detached from the world they looked at humanity almost like they were gods looking at horses, finally got brought back down to reality, if only for a moment. And while I can't say the ending is really fair, I do think it solidifies the fact that Squid Games is sort of a tragedy. But there is a silver lining and there is hope. Through helping each other, you can build a future or find a way out of a nightmare. And while the Squid Game series took 3 seasons to demonstrate that theme in a pretty depressing way, there is another series that I believe accomplishes this in a more digestible and entertaining format. And this is just a subjective opinion, so if you prefer Squid Games, then I completely understand. But the series I am referring to is of course Alice in Borderland. This series is incredible and I've been a big fan since the very first season. And while it did leave me pretty shocked that it was slept on in comparison to Squid Game, which just boosted in popularity, I do think the story it tells is sort of a seamless one. But I'll save my thoughts on that series for potentially another video. But in regards to Squid Games, it looks like there's a lot more stories to tell, and not just in Korea anymore. It looks like now we'll be traveling places across the world. Presumably, the next series will take place in the United States. But for now, we have to say goodbye to the series that started it all in Squid Games. Either way, what did you guys think? Did you enjoy the ending of Season 3? Where do you think the series will go next, and will any of the characters actually end up returning? And have you seen Alice in Borderland? And remember, if you're ever finding yourself needing some money, just call Mr. Beast.